Hey guys. Sorry for leaving everybody in the mines for like a hot second there. I was just dizzy. I was procrastinating, of course. So, hello. Hello. Good night. It's been a few days, roughly. About a few days. But I wanted to do some reading tonight because I like reading. We have some slim pickings today, but they're pickings nonetheless. Oh, I need to use the, okay, loop. There we go. How loud is it? Oh, loud enough. Maybe a bit louder. There we go. Beautiful. Beautiful. Also, 1 second. 1 second. It's very important to me. Not there. Okay. There we go, I'm ready now. I got some little stories up here for us to peruse. Another chapter of the like web serial I was reading before, along with a fairly long short story. I admit I am a bit sleepy tonight, so that may impact how much I do because I am sleepy. I had something to drink, I got sleepy. But I still want to read, So that's definitely on the table. I have it on the table right here, all the reading stuff. I set up ready. I can't just go to sleep after that. Too much effort. So I was thinking we could read this, at least read this little short story. And if I have energy, we can do more. But we'll see. It might be a bit of a short one tonight. But I hope you guys enjoy it. Because it sounded really, the premise I heard sounded really interesting. And I just thought that seemed cool, It sounds cool, right? Pretty cool. So yeah, let's do some reading. Hope that I'm able to provide some nice commentary during this dark Saturday night. Or Saturday morning, Sunday morning, whatever time it is for you. Cause it's like we're almost a week out to Halloween, aren't we? Ooh, I'm gonna have to do something for that. I was thinking of streaming World of Horror. Even if I'm kind of a pussy. I would be so scared. That's the appeal, right? You guys want to see me scared. I understand. I will do what the people ask for. Even if it makes me very scared, okay? Even if it makes me very scared, I'll do it. But yeah. Yeah. Let's see. I have some other stuff cooking, actually. Oh, fuck. I was gonna announce. Oh, fuck. There was a thing I wanted to talk about, but I'll have to do another day. Probably Monday. We'll see. Because. Reasons. I'll tell you about it on Monday. I have a thing that I'm working on. I updated my website to talk about it. And I will talk about it on Monday. It's a special project that I've been working on for a bit. And I'm very excited to tell people because it's very important. And I'm going to be very obnoxious about it, BTW. Because it's kind of important that I be obnoxious about it, but only moderately, only sensibly. Only sensibly. But yeah, that's gonna come on. Probably Monday, like I said. Maybe Tuesday, we'll see. We'll see where the future leads me. But yeah. I think that's for pre-reading announcements. I don't really have much else to say. I just figured I might as well tease a little thing I'm working on, It's like I'm the writer VTuber. I need to be writing. And of course, I'm working on something. It's not related to any big projects. It's a small standalone thing. But it's a reading thing, not like a game thing. I did want to do a game jam, but I don't have the time for it. I wish I did. But I don't have the time for it now. So, alas. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. There's a thing that will happen on Monday. That's all I'm gonna say for now. Before we read. Oh, hello, Shadow Revenant. I see you there. Though, you're joining us for a little reading Saturday. I'm gonna read this story I saw recommended on the internet. It's a bit long. It's a bit 41 pages long. But we're gonna read it. Because it seems pretty good. It's like a guy confessing to like life stuff on his deathbed. That's all I know about it. But I saw like a recommendation list for like Halloween stories. You know, it's Halloween. We gotta read a spooky story. I won't be here long, but I'll lurk. You know, I appreciate it. Anyone who joins in for any amount of time is like, you came to watch me, even if it was only for like a minute or so. It's like it's still like a special minute. You know, it's like wow, somebody wanted to see me. It's pretty cool. I like it. It makes me happy. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Allow me my voice chops going. Good old Neon. I audibly gasped and Twitch finally deigned to tell me you were live. I'm happy. Thank you, Twitch, for telling people that I exist. It makes me very happy to know that all my screaming out into the void means something. I scream into the void, but it's a hobby. It's a fun hobby. And I get an answer back. It's like, wow, that's so cool. I'm very happy. I exist. I'm out there. Yeah, I don't know who thought it doesn't have an author, but I'm assuming it could probably be. It's probably somewhere out there. But yeah, let me get started. Good old Neon. My whole life I've been a fraud. I'm not exaggerating. Pretty much all I've ever done all the time is try to create a certain impression of me and other people. Mostly be liked or admired. It's a little more complicated than that, maybe, but when you come right down to it, it's to be liked, loved, admired, approved of, applauded, whatever. You get the idea. I did well in school, but deep down the whole thing's motive wasn't to learn or improve myself, but just to do well, get good grades and make sports teams and perform well, to have a good transcript or varsity letters to show people. I didn't enjoy it much because I was always scared I wouldn't do well enough. The fear made me work really hard, so I'd always do well and end up getting what I wanted. But then, once I got the best grade or made all city or got Angela Mead to let me put my hand on her breast, I wouldn't feel much of anything except maybe a fear that I wouldn't be able to get it again. The next time or next thing I wanted. I remember being down in the rec room in Angela Mead's basement on the couch and having her let me get my hand up under her blouse and not even really feeling the soft aliveness or whatever of her breast because all I was doing was thinking, now I'm the guy that Mead let get the second with her. Later it seemed so sad. This was in middle school. She was a very big-hearted, quiet, self-contained, thoughtful girl. She's a veterinarian now, with her own practice. And I never even really saw her. I couldn't see anything except who I may be in her eyes. This cheerleader and probably number 2 or 3 among the most desirable girls in middle school that year. She was much more than that. She was beyond all the adolescent ranking and popularity crap. But I never really let her be or saw her as more. Although I put up a very good front as somebody who could have a deep conversation to really want to know and understand who she was inside. Later I was in analysis. I tried analysis, like almost everybody else then in their late 20s who made some money or had a family or whatever that they thought they wanted and still didn't feel like they were happy. A lot of people I knew tried it. It didn't really work. Although it did make everyone sound more aware of their own problems and add some useful vocabulary and concepts to the way we all had to talk to each other to fit in and sound a certain way. You know what I mean. I was in regional advertising at the time in Chicago, having made the jump from media buyer for a large consulting firm, and at only 29, I'd made creative associate, and verily, as I say, I was a fair-haired boy and on the fast track, but wasn't happy at all. Whatever happy means. But of course I didn't say this to anybody because it was such a cliche. Tears of a Clown, Richard Cory, etc., etc., etc. And the circle of people who seemed important to me seemed much more dry, oblique, and contemptuous of cliches than that. And so of course I spent all my time trying to get them to think I was dry and jaded as well, doing things like yawning and looking at my nails and saying things like, am I happy? It's one of those questions that, if it has got to be asked, more or less dictates its own answer, etc. Etc, etc. Putting in all this time and energy to create a certain impression and get approval or acceptance, that then I felt nothing about it, because it didn't have anything to do with who I really was inside. And I was disgusted with myself for always being such a fraud, but I couldn't seem to help it. Here are some of the various things I tried. EST, writing at 10 speed to Nova Scotia and back, hypnosis, cocaine, sarcocervial chiropractic, joining a charismatic church, jogging, pro bono work for the ad council, meditation classes, the Masons, analysis, landmark forum, the Course in Miracles, a right brain drawing workshop, celibacy, collecting, and restoring vintage Corvettes, and trying to sleep with a different girl every night for 2 months straight. I racked up a total of 36 for 61 and also got chlamydia, which I told friends about, acting like I was embarrassed but secretly expecting most of them to be impressed. Which, under the cover of making a lot of jokes at my expense, I think they were. But for the most part, the 2 months just made me feel shallow and predatory. Plus I missed a great deal of sleep and was a wreck at work. That was also the period I tried cocaine. I know it's probably boring, and probably boring you, by the way. But it gets a lot more interesting when I get to the part where I kill myself and discover what happens immediately after a person dies. In terms of the list, psychoanalysis is pretty much the last thing I tried. The analyst I saw was okay. A big, soft, older guy with a big ginger mustache and a pleasant, sort of informal manner. I'm not sure I remember him alive too well. He was a very good listener and seemed interested and sympathetic in a slightly distant way. At first I suspected he didn't like me or was uneasy around me. I don't think he was used to patients who were already aware what their real problem was. He was also a bit of a pill pusher. I balked at trying antidepressants. I just couldn't see myself taking pills that try to be less of a fraud. I said that even if they worked, how would I know if it was me or the pills? By the time I already knew I was a fraud. I knew what my problem was. I just couldn't seem to stop. I remember I spent maybe the first 20 times or so in analysis acting all open and candid, but in reality sort of fencing with him or leading me around by the nose, basically showing him that I wasn't just another one of those patients who stumbled in with no clue what the real problem was or who were totally out of touch with the truths about themselves. When he came right down to it, I was trying to show him that I was at least as smart as he was, and that there wasn't much of anything he was going to see about me that I hadn't already seen and figured out. And yet I wanted help, and really was there to try to get help. I didn't even tell him how unhappy I was until 5 or 6 months into the analysis, mostly because I didn't want to seem like just another whining, self-absorbed yuppie. Even though I think, even then I was on some level conscious that that's all I really was, deep down. Right from the start, what I liked best about the analyst was that his office was a mess. There were books and papers everywhere, and usually he had to clear things off the chairs so I could sit down. There was no couch. I sat in an easy chair and he sat facing me in his beat up old desk chair. His back part had one of those big rectangles or capes of back massage beads attached to it in the same way cabbies often put them on their seats in the cab. This is another thing I liked. The desk chair and the fact that it was a little too small for him. He was not a small guy. So he had to sit sort of almost hunched with his feet flat on the floor, or else sometimes he'd put his hands behind his head and lean way back in the chair, that made the back portion squeak terribly when it leaned back. There always seems to be something patronizing or a little condescending about somebody crossing their legs when they talk to you. And the desk chair didn't allow him to do this. If he ever crossed his legs, his knee would have been up around his chin. And yet he had apparently never gone out and gotten himself a bigger, nicer desk chair. He even bothered to oil the medial joint springs to keep the back from squeaking. A noise that I know would have driven me up the wall if it hadn't been my chair and I had to spend all day in it. Oh, hello, Black Iris. I will be so productive. I'm doing so much reading. I love reading. It's very fun. Good luck with work. Well, I noticed all this almost right away. The little office also reeked of pipe tobacco, which is a pleasant smell. Plus, Dr. Gustafon never took notes or answered everything with a question or any of the cliche analyst things, so it would make the whole thing too horrible to keep going back, whether it even helped or not. The whole effect was a sort of likable, disorganized, laid-back guy. And things in there actually did get better after I realized they probably wasn't going to do anything to make me quit fencing with him and trying to anticipate all his questions so I could show that I already knew the answer. He was going to get his $65 either way. And finally came out and told him about being a fraud and feeling alienated. Had to use uptown word, of course, but it was still the truth. And starting to see myself ending up living this way for the rest of my life and being completely unhappy. I told him I wasn't blaming anybody for my being a fraud. I had been adopted, but it was as a baby, and the step-parents who adopted me were better and nicer than most of the biological parents I knew anything about. Oh no. There we go. That's better. And I was never yelled at or abused or pressured to hit .400 and Legion Ball or anything. And they took out a second mortgage to send me to elite college when I could have gone scholarship to UW, Eau Claire, etc., etc. Nobody had ever done anything bad to me. Every problem I ever had, I'd been the cause of. I was a fraud, and the fact that I was lonely was my own fault. Of course his ears pricked up at fault, which is a loaded term. Because I seem to be so totally self-centered and fraudulent that I experienced everything in terms of how it affected people's view of me and what I needed to do to create the impression of me I wanted them to have. I said I knew what my problem was. What I couldn't do was stop it. I also admitted to Dr. Gustafson some of the ways I'd been jerking him around early on, trying to make sure he saw me as smart and self-aware, and said I'd known early on that playing around and showing off in analysis were a waste of time and money, but that I couldn't seem to help myself. It just happened automatically. He smiled at all this, which was the first time I remember seeing him smile. I don't mean he was sour or humorless. He had a big, red, friendly face and a pleasant enough manner, but this was the first time he'd smiled like a human being having an actual conversation. And yet, at the same time, I already saw what I'd left myself open for. And sure enough, he says it. If I understand you right, he says, you're saying that you're basically a calculating, manipulative person who always says what you think will get somebody to approve of you or form some impression of you think you want. I told him that was maybe a little simplistic, but basically accurate. And he said further that as he understood it, I was saying that I felt as if I was trapped in this false way of being and unable to ever be totally open until the truth, irregardless of whether it'd make me look good in others' eyes or not. And I somewhat resignedly said yes, and that I always seemed to have had this fraudulent, calculating part of my brain firing away all the time, as if I were constantly playing chess with everybody and figuring out that if I wanted them to move a certain way, I had to move in such ways to induce them to move that way. He asked if I ever played chess, and I told him I used to in middle school, but quit because I couldn't be as good as I eventually wanted to be. How frustrating it was to get just good enough to know what getting good at it would be like, but not being able to get that good, etc. I was laying it on sore thick in hopes of distracting him from the big insane question I realized I'd set myself up for. But it didn't work. He leaned back in his lab chair and paused as if he were thinking hard. For effect. He was thinking he was going to get to feel like he'd really earned his $65 today. Part of the pause always involved stroking his mustache in an unconscious way. I was reasonably sure that he was going to say something like, "So then how are you able to do what you just did a moment ago?" In other words, meaning how I was able to be honest about the fraudulence if I was really a fraud, meaning he thought he caught me in some kind of logical contradiction or paradox. And I went ahead and played a little dumb, probably, to get him to go ahead and say it, partly because I still held out some hope that what he'd say might be more discerning or incisive than I had predicted. It was also partially because I liked him, and liked the way he seemed genuinely pleased and excited at the idea of being helpful, but was trying to exercise professional control over his facial expression in order to make the excitement look more like simple pleasantness and clinical interest in my case or whatever. He was hard not to like. He had what is known as an engaging manner. By way of decor, the office wall behind his chair had 2 framed prints, one being that Wyeth one of the little girl in the wheat field crawling uphill towards the farmhouse. The other is still life, 2 apples in the bowl on a table by Cezanne. To be honest, I only knew it was Cezanne because it was an art institute poster and had a banner with info on a Cezanne show underneath the painting, which was a still life, and which was weirdly discomforting because there was something slightly off about the perspective or style that made the table look crooked and apples look almost square. The prints were obviously there to give the analyst's patients something to look at, since many people like to look around or look at things on a wall while they talk. I didn't have any trouble looking right at him most of the time. I was in there though. He did have a talent for putting you at ease, there was no question about it. But I had no illusions that this was the same as having enough insight or firepower to find some way that really helped me, though. There was a basic logical paradox that I call the fraudulent paradox that I discovered more or less on my own while taking a mathematical course, logic course, in school. I remember this as being a huge undergrad lecture course that met twice a week in an auditorium with the professor up on stage, and on Fridays in smaller discussion sections led by a graduate assistant, whose whole life seemed to be mathematical logic. Plus, all you had to do to ace the class was sit down with the assigned textbook and that the prof was the editor of and memorize the different modes of argument, normal forms, and axioms of first-order quantification, meaning the course is as clean as mechanical as logic itself, that if you put the time and effort, out popped the good grade at the other end. When we got the paradoxes like the Berry and Russell paradoxes and the incompleteness theorem at the very end of the term, they weren't on the final. The fraudulent paradox was that the more time and effort you put into trying to appear impressive or attractive to other people, the less impressive or attractive you felt inside. You were a fraud. And the more of a fraud you felt like, the harder you tried to convey an image, impressive or a likable image of yourself, so other people wouldn't find out what a hollow, fraudulent person you really were. Logically, you'd think that the moment a supposedly intelligent 19-year-old became aware of this paradox, he'd stop being a fraud and just settle for being himself. Whatever that was. Because he'd figured out that being a fraud was a vicious, infinite regress that ultimately resulted in being frightened, lonely, alienated, etc. But here was the other, higher order paradox, which didn't even have a form or name. I couldn't. Discovering the first paradox at age 19 just brought home to me in spades when empty, fraudulent person I'd basically been ever since at least the time I was 4, and lied to my stepdad because I realized somehow right in the middle of him asking me if I'd broken the bowl that if I said I did it but confessed it in a sort of clumsy, impossible way, then he wouldn't believe me, would instead believe my sister Fern, who's my stepparents' biological daughter, was the one who'd actually broken the antique Moser glass bowl that my stepmom had inherited from her biological grandmother and totally loved. Plus, it would later induce him to see me as a kind, good stepbrother who was so anxious to keep Fern, whom I really did like, from getting in trouble that I'd be willing to lie and take the punishment for it for her. I'm not explaining this very well. I was only 4, for one thing, and the realization didn't hit me in words the way I just now put it, rather more in terms of feelings and associations and certain mental flashes and my stepparents' faces with various expressions on them. But it happened that fast, at only 4, that I figured out how to create a certain impression by knowing what effect I'd produced on my stepdad by implausibly confessing that I'd punched Fern in the arm and stolen her hula hoop, and had run all the way downstairs with it and started hula hooping in the dining room, right by the sideboard with all my stepmom's antique glassware and figurines on it. While Fern, forgetting all about her arm and hoop because of her concern over the bowl and other glassware, came running downstairs shouting at me, reminding me about how important the rule was that we weren't supposed to play in the dining room. Meaning that by lying in such a deliberate, unconvincing way, I could actually get everything that a direct lie would supposedly get me. Plus look noble and self-sacrificing. Plus also make my stepparents feel good because they always tended to feel good when one of their kids did something that showed character. Because it's the sort of thing that they couldn't really help but see as a reflecting as reflecting favorably on them as shapers of their kid's character. I'm putting all this in such a long, rushing, clumsy way that I try to convey the way I remember it suddenly hit me. Looking at my stepfather's big, kindly face as he held two larger pieces of the Moser bowl and tried to look angrier than he really felt. He'd always thought the more expensive pieces out to be kept secure in storage somewhere, whereas my stepmom's view was more like, what was the point of having nice things if you didn't have them out where people could enjoy them? How to appear a certain way and get them to think a certain thing hit me just that fast. Keep in mind I was only around 4, and I can't pretend it felt bad realizing it. The truth is, it felt great. I felt powerful. Smart. It felt a little like looking at part of a puzzle you're doing, and you've got a piece in your hand and you can't see where it is in the larger puzzle it's supposed to go, or how to make it fit. Wait 1 second. Alright. Looking at all the holes, and then all of a sudden the flash you see, for no reason right then, you could point to or explain to anyone that if you turn the piece this one certain way, it'll fit. And it does! And maybe the best way to put it is, in that one tiny instant, you feel suddenly connected to something larger and much more of the complete picture, the same way the pieces. The only part I neglected to anticipate was Fern's reaction to getting blamed for the bowl, and then punished even worse when she continued to deny that she'd been the one playing around the dining room. And my step-parents' position was that they were even more upset and disappointed about her lying than they were with the bowl, which I said was just a material object, and not ultimately important in the larger scheme of things. My step-parents spoke this way. They were people of high ideals and values, humanists. Their big idea was total honesty in all the family relationships, and lying was the worst, most disappointing infraction you could commit, and their view as parents. They tended to discipline Fern a little more firmly than they did me, by the way. But this too was just an extension of their values. They were concerned about being fair and having me be able to feel that I was just as much the real child as Fern was, so I'd feel maximally secured and loved, and sometimes this concern with fairness caused them to bend a little too far or backwards when it came to discipline. So that Fern then got regarded as being a liar when she was not, and that must have hurt her way more than the actual punishment did. She was only 5 at the time. It's horrible to be regarded as a fraud, or to believe that people think you're a fraud or a liar. It's possibly one of the worst feelings in the world. And even though I hadn't really had any direct experience with it, I'm sure it must be doubly horrible when you're actually telling the truth, and they didn't believe you. I don't think Fern ever quite got over that episode, although the 2 of us never talked about it afterward, except for one sort of cryptic remark she made over her shoulder once, when we were both in high school and having an argument about something, and Fern was storming out of the house. She was sort of a classically troubled adolescent, smoking, makeups, mediocre grades, dating older guys, etc., whereas I was the family's fair-haired boy and had a killer GPA, played varsity ball, etc. One way to put it is that I looked and acted much better on the surface than Fern did, although she eventually settled down and ended up going to college and is now doing okay. She's also one of the funniest people on earth, with a very dry, subtle sense of humor. I like her a lot. The point being is that was the start of my being a fraud. Although it's not as if the Broken Bowl episode was somehow the origin or cause of my fraudulence or some kind of childhood trauma that I've never gotten over and had to go into analysis to work out. The fraud part of me was always there. Just as a puzzle piece, objectively speaking, is a true piece of the puzzle even before you see how it fits. For a while I thought that possibly one or the other of my biological parents had been frauds or had carried some type of fraud gene or something, and that I had inherited it, but that was a dead end. There was no way to know. And even if I did, what difference would it make? I was still a fraud. It was still my own unhappiness that I had to deal with. Once again, I'm aware that it's clumsy to put it all this way, but the point is that all this and more is flashing through my head just in the interval of a small dramatic pause Dr. Gustafsson allowed himself before delivering his big reductio ad absurdum argument that I couldn't be a total fraud if I had just come out and admitted my fraudulence to him just now. I know that you know as well as I do how fast thoughts and associations can fly through your head. You can be in the middle of a creative meeting at your job or something, and enough material can rush through your head just in the little silences when people are looking over their notes and waiting for the next presentation they would take exponentially longer than the whole meeting, just to try to put a few seconds silence flood of thoughts into words. This is another paradox, that many of the most important impressions and thoughts in a person's life are ones that flash through their head so fast that fast isn't even the right word. They seem totally different from or outside the regular sequential clock time we all live by, and they have so little relation to the sort of linear one word after another word English we all communicate with each other that could easily take a whole lifetime just to spell out the contents of one split-second flash of thoughts and connections, etc., etc. And yet, we all seem to go around trying to use English, or whatever language our native country happens to use, it goes without saying, and try to convey to other people what we're thinking and to find out what they're thinking, when in fact deep down everybody knows that it's a charade and they're just going through the motions. What goes on inside is just too vast and huge and interconnected for words to do more than barely sketch the outlines of at most one tiny little part of it at any given instant. The internal head speed, or whatever these ideas, memories, realizations, emotions, and so on is even faster, by the way. Exponentially faster, unimaginably faster. When you're dying, meaning during that vanishingly tiny nanosecond between when you technically die and when the next thing happens. So in reality, the cliche about people's whole life flashing before their eyes as they're dying isn't all that far off. Although the whole life here isn't really a sequential thing, where first you're born, then you're in a crib, and then you're up at the plate and lesion ball, etc. Which it turns out that's what people usually mean when they say my whole life, meaning a discrete, chronological series of moments that they all add up and call their lifetime. It's not really like that. The best way I could think of to try to say that it is that it all happens at once, but that at once doesn't really mean a finite moment of sequential time the way we think of time while we're alive, plus that what turns out to be the meaning of the term my life isn't even close to what we think we're talking about when we say my life. Words in chronological time create all these total misunderstandings of what's really going on at the most basic level. And yet at the same time, English is all we have to try to understand it and try to form anything larger or more meaningful and true with anybody else. Which is yet another paradox. Dr. Gustafsson, whom I would meet again later and find out that he had almost nothing to do with the big, doughy, repressed guy sitting back against his chair beads in his River Forest office, colon cancer and MRA at the time, and him knowing nothing yet except that he didn't feel quite right down there in the bathroom lately, and if it kept on, he'd make an appointment to go in and ask his internist about it. Dr. G would later say that my whole life flashed before me phenomenon at the end is more like being a white cap on the surface of the ocean. Meaning that it's only at the moment you subside and start sliding back in that you're really even aware that there's an ocean at all. When you're up and out there as a white cap, you might talk and act as if you know you're just a white cap on the ocean. But deep down, you don't think there's really an ocean at all. It's almost impossible to. Or like a leaf that doesn't believe it's in the tree it's part of, etc. There are all sorts of ways to express it. And of course, all this time, you've probably been noticing what seems like the really central overarching paradox, which is that this whole thing where I'm saying words, can't really do it, and time doesn't really go in a straight line, is something you're hearing as words that you have to start listening to the first word, and each successive word after that in chronological time to understand. So if I'm saying that words in sequential time have nothing to do with it, you're wondering why we're sitting here in this car using words and taking up your increasingly precious time, being, aren't I sort of logically contradicting myself right at the start? Not to mention, if I maybe full of BS about knowing what happens, if I ready to kill myself, how can you even be hearing this? Meaning I am a fraud. That's okay. It doesn't really matter what you think. I mean, it probably matters to you, or you think it does. That isn't what I mean by doesn't matter. What I mean is that it doesn't really matter what you think about me. Because despite appearances, this isn't even really about me. All I'm trying to do is sketch out one little part of what it was like before I died, and why I at least thought I did it, so that you'll have at least some idea of why what happened afterward happened, and why it had the impact it did. on who this is really about. Meaning it's like an abstract or sort of intro, meant to be very brief and sketchy, and yet of course, look how much time and English it's seeming to take even to say it. It's interesting if you really think about it, how clumsy and laborious it seems to be to convey even the smallest thing. How much time would you even say has passed so far? One reason why Dr. Gustafsson, I don't know how to say that name, would have made a terrible poker player or fraud is that whenever he thought it was a big moment in analysis, he'd always make a production of leaning back in his desk chair, which made that loud sound as the back tilted back and his feet went back on their heels so the soles showed. Although he was good at making the position look comfortable and very familiar to his body, like it felt good doing that when he had to think. The whole thing was both slightly overdramatic and yet likable enough for some reason. Brian, by the way, has reddish hair and slightly asymmetrical green eyes, the kind of green people buy tinted contact lenses to get, and is attractive in a sort of witchy way. I think she's attractive anyway. She's grown up to be a very poised, witty, self-sufficient person, with maybe just the slightest whiff of the perfume of loneliness that hangs around unmarried women around age 30. The fact is, we're all lonely, of course. Everyone knows this. It's almost a cliche. So yet another layer of my essential fraudulence is that I pretended to myself that my loneliness was special, that it was uniquely my fault, because I was somehow especially fraudulent and hollow. It's not special at all, we all got it. In spades. Dead or not, Dr. Gustafsson knew more about all this than I, so they spoke with what came off as genuine authority and pleasure when he said, maybe a little superciliously, given how obvious it was. But if you're constitutionally false and manipulative and unable to be honest about who you really are, Neil. Neil being my given name. It was on my birth certificate when I got adopted. How is it that you were able to drop the sparring manipulation and be honest with me a moment ago? But that's all it had been, in spite of all the English that's been expended on just my head's partial contents and a tiny interval between then and now. About who you really are. So it turned out I'd been right in predicting what his big logical insight was going to be, and although I played along with him for a little while, so as to not prick his bubble, inside I felt pretty bleak indeed. Because now I knew that he was going to be just as pliable and credulous as everyone else. He didn't appear to have anything close to the firepower I needed to give me any hope of getting helped out of the trap of fraudulence and happiness I constructed for myself. Because the real truth was that my confession of being a fraud and of having wasted time sparring with him over the precious weeks in order to manipulate him to see me as exceptional and insightful had itself been kind of manipulative. It was pretty clear that Dr. Gustafsson, in order to survive in private practice, could not be totally stupid or obtuse about people. So it seemed reasonable to assume that he'd noticed the massive amount of fencing and general showing off I'd been doing during the first weeks of the analysis, and thus had come to some conclusions about my apparently desperate need to make a certain kind of impression on him. And though I wasn't totally certain, it was thus at least a decent possibility that he sized me up as basically empty, insecure person whose whole life involved trying to impress people and manipulate their view of me in order to compensate for the inner emptiness. It's not as if this is an incredibly rare or obscure type of personality after all. So the fact that I had chosen to be supposedly honest and to diagnose myself aloud was in fact just one more move in my campaign to make sure Dr. Gustafsson understood that as a patient I was uniquely acute and self-aware, and that there was very little chance he was going to see or diagnose anything about me that I wasn't already aware of, and able to turn my own tactical advantage in terms of creating whatever image or impression of myself I wanted him to see at that moment. His big, supposed insight then, which had as its ostensible first order point that my fraudulence could not possibly be as thoroughgoing and hopeless as they claimed it was, since my ability to be honest with him about it logically contradicted my claim of being capable of honesty, actually had as its larger unspoken point the claim that he could discern things about my basic character that I myself could not see or interpret correctly, and thus that he could help me out of the trap by pointing out inconsistencies in my view of myself as totally fraudulent. The fact that this insight that he appeared so clearly pleased and excited about was not only obvious and superficial, but also wrong. This was depressing. Much the way discovering that somebody is easy to manipulate is always a little depressing. A corollary to the fraudulence paradox is that you simultaneously want to fool everyone you meet, and yet also somehow always hope that you'll come across someone who is your match or equal and can't be fooled. But this was sort of the last straw. I mentioned that I tried a whole number of different things that hadn't worked already. So, depressing is a gross understatement, actually. Plus, of course, the obvious fact that I was paying this guy for help and getting out of the trap, and he now showed that he didn't have the mental firepower to do it. So I was now thinking of the prospect of spending time and money driving the river forest twice a week just to yank the analyst around in ways he couldn't see, so he'd think it was actually less fraudulent than I thought it was, and that analysis with him was gradually helping me see this. Being that he'd probably be getting more out of it than I would. For me, it would just be fraudulence as usual. However tedious and sketchy this all is, you're at least getting an idea, I think, of what it was like inside my head. If nothing else, you're seeing how exhausting and— oh, wait. 1 second. I dropped it. Okay. Okay, we're rolling back in. I forgot to plug my phone in. I use my phone as a camera. I use my phone as a camera. Stay still. Stay still, camera. And I forgot to plug it in the charge. And it gave me a 15% battery warning. I was like, wait, you weren't charging the whole time? You mean you weren't giving electricity to the device this whole time? That would have been bad. That would have been very bad. Him. Okay. Oh boy. Okay, we're good now. I'm gonna take a sip real quick. This is a good sip time, I think. I was wondering how long this story was, and it's already almost been an hour. It's very good. I'm always a fan of stories that are just like, let's take a person's brain and psychoanalyze it. Just tear it apart to its ugliest components. I do like those kinds of stories. Alright. If nothing else, you're seeing how exhausting and sophilistic it is to be like this. And I had been this way my whole life, at least from age 4 onward, as far as I could recall. Of course, it's also a really stupid and egotistical way to be. Of course you could see that. This is why the ultimate, most deeply unspoken point of the analyst's insight, namely that who and what I believed I was not what I really was at all, which I thought was false, was in fact true. Although not for the reasons that Dr. Gustafsson, who was leaning back in his chair and smoothing his big mustache with his thumb and forefinger, while I played dumb and let him feel like he was explaining to me a contradiction that I couldn't understand without his help, believed. One of my other ways of playing dumb for the next several sessions after was to protest his upbeat diagnosis, irrelevantly, since by this time I had pretty much given up on Dr. Gustafsson and was starting to think of various ways to kill myself without causing pain or making a mess that would disgust whoever found me. By means of listing the various ways I've been fraudulent, even in my pursuit of ways to achieve genuine, uncalculating integrity. I'll spare giving you the whole list again. I basically went all the way back to childhood, which analysts always like you to do, and laid it on. Partially, I was curious to see how much he'd put up with. For example, I told him about going from genuinely loving ball, loving the smell of grass and distant sprinklers, or the feel of pounding my fist in the glove over and over and yelling, "Hey, batter. Hey, batter, swing." The big, low, red, tumid sun at the game start versus the R lights coming out with the clank and the glowing twilight of the late innings, and of the steam and clean burnt smell of ironing my Legion uniform, or the feel of sliding and watching all the dust it raised settle around me, of all the parents in shorts and rubber flip-flops setting up lawn chairs with styrofoam coolers, little kids hooking their fingers around the backstop fence or running off after fouls, the smell of the ump's aftershave and sweat, the little whisk broom he'd bend down and tidy the plate with. Mostly the feel of stepping up to the plate knowing anything was possible, a feeling like the sun flaring somewhere high up in my chest. And about how only by maybe 14 all of that had disappeared and turned to worrying about averages and if I could make All-City again, or being so worried I'd screw up that I didn't even like ironing the uniform anymore before games because it gave me too much time to think. Standing there so nerved up about doing well that night that I couldn't even notice the little checking signs the iron made anymore, or the singular smell of the steam when I hit the little button for steam. I'd basically ruined all the best parts of everything like that. How sometimes it felt like I was actually asleep and none of this was even real, and someday, out of nowhere, I was maybe going to suddenly wake up in mid-stride. That was part of the idea behind things like joining the charismatic church up in Naperville, or try to wake up spiritually instead of living in this fog of fraudulence. The truth shall set you free. The Bible. This is what Beverly Elizabeth Slane liked to call my holy roller phase. And that charismatic church really did seem to help a lot of the parishioners and congregants I met. They were humble and devoted and charitable, and gave tirelessly without thought of personal reward and active service to the church. And in doing resources and time to the church's campaign to build a new altar along the enormous cross of thick glass whose crossbeam is lit up and filled with iterated water and was to have various kinds of beautiful fish swimming in it. Fish being a prominent Christ symbol for charismatics. In fact, most of us who were the most devoted and active in the church had bumper stickers on our cars with no words or anything except a plain line drawing of the outline of a fish. This lack of ostentation impressed me as classy and genuine. But with the real truth here being how quickly I went from being someone who was there because he wanted to wake up and stop being a fraud to being somebody who was so anxious to impress the congregation with how devoted and active I was that I volunteered to help take the collection and never missed one study group the whole time. It was on 2 different committees for coordinating fundraising for the new aquarial altar and deciding exactly what kind of equipment and fish would be used for the crossbeam. Plus, often being the one in the front row whose voice and responses were the loudest and who waved both hands in the air the most enthusiastically that showed the spirit had entered me, and speaking in tongues, mostly consisting of D's and G's, except not really, of course, because, in fact, I was really just pretending to speak in tongues, because all the parishioners around me were speaking in tongues and had the spirit, and so in a kind of fever of excitement, I was able to hoodwink even myself into thinking that I really had the spirit moving through me and was speaking in tongues, when in reality I was just shouting Dugga Mugga Urgle Durgle over and over. In other words, so anxious to see myself as truly born again, that I actually convinced myself that the tongue's babble was real language and somehow less false than plain English at expressing the feelings of the Holy Spirit rolling like a juggernaut right through me. This went on for about 4 months, not to mention falling over backward whenever Pastor Steve came down the row, popping people and popped me in the forehead with the heel of his hand, but falling over backward on purpose. Not genuinely being struck down by a spirit like the other people on either side of me, one of whom actually fainted and had to be brought around with salts. It was only when I was walking out to the parking lot one night after Wednesday night praise that I suddenly experienced a flash of self-awareness or clarity or whatever, in which I suddenly stopped conning myself and realized that I'd been a fraud all these months. In the church, too. I was really only saying and doing these things because all the real parishioners were doing them, and I wanted everyone to think I was sincere. Who is that? Salty Black Dog. Hello! Welcome in. Thank you for the follow. I hope you enjoy this quite intense little story. I was a fraud my whole life. I said, hold the change at the register, but I want that change for a candy bar. I told him to hold the change. It just about knocked me over. That was how vividly I saw it, how I deceived myself. The revealed truth was that I was an even bigger fraud in church about being a newly reborn, authentic person than I had been before Deacon Mrs. Halberstadt first rang my doorbell out of nowhere as part of their missionary service and talked me into giving it a shot. Because at least before the church thing, I wasn't conning myself. I'd known that I was a fraud since at least age 19, but at least I've been able to admit and face the fraudulence directly instead of BSing myself that I was something I wasn't. All this was presented in the context of a very long facile argument about fraudulence with Dr. Gustafsson that would take way too much time to relate to you in detail. So I'm just telling you about some of the more garish examples. With Dr. G, it was more in the form of a prolonged multi-session back and forth on whether or not I was a total fraud, during which I got more and more disgusted with myself for even playing along. By this point in the analysis, I'd pretty much decided he was an idiot, or at very least limited in his insights into what was really going on with people. There was also the blatant issue of the mustache and of him always playing with it. Essentially, he saw what he wanted to see, which was just the sort of person I could practically eat for lunch in terms of creating whatever ideas or impressions of me I wanted. For instance, I told him about the period of trying jogging, during which I seemed never to fail to have to increase my pace and pump my arms more vigorously whenever someone drove by or looked up from his yard, so I ended up with bone spurs and eventually had to quit altogether. Or spending at least 2 to 3 sessions recounting the example of the introductory meditation class at the Downers Grove Community Center that Melissa Betts of Settlement, Doran, got me to take, at which through sheer force of will, I'd always forced myself to remain totally still, with my legs crossed and back perfectly straight long after the other students had all given up and fallen back on their mats, shuddering and holding their heads. Right from the first class meeting, even though the small brown instructor had told us to shoot for only 10 minutes of stillness at the outset, because most Westerners' minds could not maintain more than a few minutes of stillness and mindful concentration without feeling so restless and ill at ease that they couldn't stand it. I always remained absolutely still and focused, and breathing my prana with the lower diaphragm longer than any of them, sometimes for up to 30 minutes, even though my knees and lower back were on fire, and I had what felt like swarms of insects crawling over my arms and shooting out the top of my head. And Master Gurpreet, although he kept his facial expression inscrutable, gave me a deep and seemingly respectful bow and said that I sat almost like a living statue mindful of repose, and that he was impressed. The problem was that we were also all supposed to continue practicing our meditation on our own at home between classes, and when I tried to do it alone, I couldn't seem to sit still and follow my breath for more than even a few minutes before crawling out of my skin, and I had to stop. I can only sit and appear quiet and mindful and withstand the unbelievably restless and horrible feelings when all of us were doing it together in class, meaning only when there were other people to make an impression on. And even in class, the truth was that I was often concentrating not so much on following my prana as on keeping totally still in the correct posture and having a deeply peaceful and meditative expression on my face in case anybody was cheating and had their eyes open and was looking around. Plus also to ensure Master Gurpreet would continue to see me as exceptional and keep addressing me by what became sort of his class nickname for me, which was Statue. Finally, in the final few class meetings, when Master Gurpreet told us to sit still and focus for only as long as we comfortably could, and had waited almost an hour before finally hitting his small bell with a little silver thing that signaled the period of meditation's end, only I, an extremely thin, pale girl who had her own meditation bench that she brought to class with her, were able to sit still and focus for the whole hour. Although at several different points I'd get so cramped and restless that it felt like bright blue fire going up my spine and shooting invisibly out of the top of my head as blobs of color exploded over and over again behind my eyelids. I thought I was going to jump up screaming and take a header right out the window. And at the end of the next course, when there was also an opportunity to sign up for the next session, which is called Deepening the Practice, Master Gurpreet presented several of us with different honorary certificates, and mine had my name and the date and was inscribed in black calligraphy. Champion Meditator, most impressive Western student, Statue. It was only after I fell asleep that night, I'd finally sort of compromised and told myself that I was practicing the meditative discipline at home by lying down and focusing and following my breathing very closely as I fell asleep. And it did turn out to be a phenomenal sleep aid. That while I was asleep, I had the dream about the statue in the commons and realized that Master Gurpreet had actually, in all likelihood, seen right through me the whole time, and that the certificate was in reality a subtle rebuke or joke at my expense. Meaning he was letting me know that I was a fraud, and not even coming close to actually quieting my mind's ceaseless conniving about how to impress people in order to achieve mindfulness and honor my true inner self. Of course, what he seemed not to have divined was that in reality I actually seemed to have no true inner self, and that the more I tried to be genuine, the more empty and fraudulent I ended up feeling inside, which I told nobody about until my stab at analysis with Dr. Gustafsson. In the dream, I was in a town commons in Aurora, over near the Pershing Tank Memorial by the clock tower. And what I'm doing in the dream is sculpting an enormous marble granite statue of myself, using a huge iron chisel and a hammer the size of those ones they give you to try to hit the bell at the top of the big thermometer like thing at carnivals. And when the statue's finally done, I put it on a big bandstand or platform and spend all my time polishing it and keeping birds from sitting on it or doing their business on it, cleaning up litter and keeping the grass neat all around the bandstand. In the dream, my whole life flashes by like that. The sun and moon go back and forth across the sky like windshield wipers over and over, and I never seem to sleep or eat or take a shower. The dream takes place in dream time as opposed to waking chronological time, meaning I'm condemned to a whole life of being nothing but a sort of custodian to the statue. I'm not saying it was subtle or hard to figure out. Everybody from Fern, Mr. Gupri, the anorexic girl with her own bench, and Ginger Manley, to people from the firm and some of the media reps we bought from time from. I was still a media buyer at the time. I'll walk by. Some several times. At one point, Melissa Betts and her new fiancé even spread out a blanket and have a sort of little picnic in the shade of the statue. But none of them ever look over or say anything. It's obviously another dream about fraudulence. Like the dream where I'm supposedly a big pop star on stage, but all I really do is lip sync to one of my step-parents' old Mamas and Papas records that's just on a record player just off stage. And somebody whose face I can't even look over long enough to make out keeps putting his hand in the area of the record as if he's going to make it skip or scratch. And the whole dream makes my skin crawl. These dreams were obvious. There were warnings from my subconscious I was hollow and a fraud. It's only a matter of time before the whole charade fell apart. Another one of my stepmother's treasured antiques was a silver pocket watch of her maternal grandfather's with the Latin Respice Finem inscribed on the inside of the case. It wasn't until after she passed away, and my stepfather said she wanted me to have it, that I bothered to look up the term. After which I'd gotten the same sort of crawly feeling as with Master Gupreet's certificate. Much of the nightmarish quality of the dream about the statue was due to the way the sun raced back and forth across the sky, and the speed with which my whole life flew by like that in the commons. It was obviously also my subconscious enlightening me as to the meditation instructors having seen through me the whole time, after which I was too embarrassed even to go to try to get a refund for deepening the practice class, which there was now no way I felt like I could show up for, even though at the same time I also still had fantasies about Master Gupreet becoming my mentor or guru, and using all kinds of inscrutable Eastern techniques to show me the way to meditate myself into having a true self, etc., etc. I'll spare you any more examples. For instance, I'll spare you the literally countless examples of my fraudulence with girls. With the ladies, as I say. In just about every dating relationship I ever had, or the most unbelievable amount of fraudulence and calculation involved in my career. Not just in terms of manipulating the consumer and manipulating the client to trusting that your agency's ideas are the best way to manipulate the consumer, but in the inter-office politics of the agency itself. Like, for example, in sizing up what sorts of things your superiors want you to believe, including the belief that they're smarter than you and that's why they're your superior, and then giving them what they want but doing it just subtly enough that they never get a chance to view you as a sycophant or a yes man, which they want to believe they do not really want, but instead see you as a tough-minded, independent thinker who from time to time bows to the way of superior intelligence and creative firepower, etc., etc., etc. The whole agency was one big ballet of fraudulence and of manipulating people's images or your ability to manipulate images, of virtual hall mirrors. And I was good at it, remember? I thrived there. It was the sheer amount of time Dr. Gustafsson spent touching and smoothing his mustache that indicated he wasn't aware of doing it, and in fact was subconsciously reassuring himself that it was still there. Which is not especially a subtle habit, in terms of insecurity, since after all, facial hair is known as a secondary sex characteristic. Meaning, what he was really doing was subconsciously reminding himself that something else was still there, if you know what I mean. This was some of why I was no real surprise when it turned out the overall direction he wanted the analysis to proceed in involved many issues of masculinity and how I understood my masculinity, my manhood, in other words. This also helped explain everything from the last female crawling in 2 testicle-shaped objects that looked deformed prints on the wall to the African or Indian drum things and the little figurines with, sometimes exaggerated, sex characteristics on the shelf over his desk. Plus the pipe, the unnecessary size of his wedding band, even a somewhat overdone little boy clutter at the office itself. It was pretty clear that there were some major sexual insecurities and maybe even homosexual type ambiguities that Dr. Gustafsson was subconsciously trying to hide from himself and reassure himself about. In one obvious way he did this was to sort of project his insecurities onto his patients and get them to believe that America's culture had a uniquely brutal and alienating way of brainwashing its males from an early age into all kinds of damaging beliefs and superstitions about what being a so-called man was. Real man was, such as competitiveness and self-concert, winning at all costs, dominating others through intelligence or will, being strong, not showing your true emotions, depending on others, seeing you as a real man in order to reassure yourself of your manhood, seeing your own value solely in terms of accomplishments, being obsessed with your career or income, feeling as if you're constantly being judged or on display, etc., etc. This is later in the analysis. After a seemingly endless period where, after every example of fraudulence I gave him, he'd make a show congratulating me on being able to reveal what I felt were shameful, fraudulent examples, and said that this was proof I had much more of an ability to be genuine than I. Apparently because my insecurities or male fears seemed able to give myself credit for. Plus, it didn't exactly seem like a coincidence that the cancer he was even then harboring was in his colon. That shameful, dirty, secret place right near the rectum. With the idea being that using your rectum or colon to secretly harbor an alien growth was a blatant symbol both of homosexuality and other repressive belief that its open acknowledgement would equal disease and death. Dr. Gustafsson and I both had a good laugh over this one, after we both died and were outside linear time in the process of dramatic change. You could bet on that. Outside time is not just an expression, a manner of speaking, by the way. By this time in the analysis, I was playing with him, the way a cat does with her bird. If I had an ounce of real self-respect, I would have stopped and gone back to the Downers Grove Community Center and thrown myself on Master Gurpreet's mercy. And except for maybe 1 or 2 girls I dated, he was the only one who appeared to see all the way through, right to the core of my fraudulence. Plus his oblique, very dry way of indicating this betrayed a sort of serene indifference to whether I even understood they saw right through me that I found incredibly impressive and genuine. Here in Master Gurpreet was a man with, as I say, nothing to prove. But I didn't. Instead, I more or less conned myself into sticking with going to see Dr. G twice a week for almost 9 months. Towards the end, it was only once a week because by then the cancer had been diagnosed and he was getting radiation treatment every Tuesday and Thursday. Telling myself that at least I was trying to find some venue in which I could get help finding a way to be genuine, stop manipulating everybody around me to see the statue as erect, impressive, etc. Nor, however, is it strictly true that the analyst had nothing interesting to say, or that he didn't sometimes provide helpful models or angles for looking at the basic problem. For instance, it turned out that one of his basic operating premises was the claim that there were really only 2 basic, fundamental orientations a person could have toward the world. 1, love, and 2, fear. And that they couldn't coexist, or in logical terms, that their domains were exhaustive and mutually exclusive, or that their 2 sets had no intersection but their union comprised all possible elements, or that meaning that, in other words, that each day of your life was spent in service to one of these masters or the other, and one cannot serve 2 masters, the Bible, again. And that one of the worst things about the conception of competitive, achievement-oriented masculinity that America supposedly hardwired into its males was that it caused a more or less constant state of fear that made genuine love next to impossible. That is, that what passed for love in American men was usually just the need to be regarded in a certain way, meaning that today's males were so constantly afraid of not measuring up. Dr. G's phrase, which evidently no pun intended, that they had to spend all their time convincing others of their masculine validity, which happened to also be a term from formal logic, nor the ease their own insecurity, making genuine love next to impossible. Although it seemed a little bit simplistic to see its fear as just a male problem, try watching a girl skin on a scale sometime. It turns out that Dr. Gustafsson was very nearly right in the concept of the two masters, though not in the way that he, when alive and confused by his own real identity, believed. And even while I played along by pretending to argue or not quite understand what he was driving at, the idea struck me that maybe the real root of my problem was not fraudulence, but a basic inability to really love. Even to genuinely love my step-parents, or Fern, or Melissa Betts, or Ginger Manley of Aurora West High in 1979, whom I'd often thought of as the only girl I'd ever truly loved. Though Dr. G's bromide about men being brainwashed to equate love with accomplishment or conquest also applied here. The plain truth was that Ginger Manley was just the first girl I ever went all the way with, and most of my tender feelings about her were really just nostalgia for the feeling of immense cosmic validation I'd felt when she'd finally let me take her genes all the way off and put my so-called manhood inside her, etc., etc. There's really no bigger cliche than losing your virginity and later having all kinds of retrospective tenderness for the girl involved. Or what Beverly Elizabeth Slane, a research technician I used to see outside of work when I was a media buyer and had a lot of conflict with towards the end, said, which I don't think I ever told Dr. G about, fraudulence-wise, probably because it cuts a little too close to the bone. Towards the end, she had compared me to some piece of ultra-expensive new medical or diagnostic equipment that could discern more about you in one quick scan than you could ever know about yourself. But the equipment doesn't care about you. You're just a sequence of processes and codes. It is an interesting story. I like it. It's like it's like peeling apart someone's brain. And even then, it's like someone else is saying it. It's like, how much do you really know about the person if it's just their account of of themselves, you know? Is it just more fraudulence, or is there some genuine core to it all? What the machine understands about you doesn't actually mean anything to it, even though it's really good at what it does. Beverly has a bad temper combined with some serious firepower. She was not someone you wanted to have pissed off at you. She said she'd never felt the gaze of someone so penetrating, discerning, and yet totally empty of care. Like she was a puzzle or problem I was figuring out. She said it was thanks to me that she discovered a difference between being penetrated and really known versus penetrated and just violated. Needless to say, these thanks were sarcastic. Some of this was just her emotional makeup. She found it impossible to really end a relationship unless all bridges were burned and things got said that were so devastating that there could be no possibility of rapprochement to haunt her or prevent her from moving on. Nevertheless, it penetrated. I never did forget what she said in that letter. Even if being fraudulent and being unable to love were in fact ultimately the same thing, a possibility that Dr. Gustafsson never seemed to consider no matter how many times I set him up to see it. Being unable to really love was at least a different model or lens through which to see the problem. Plus, initially it seemed like a promising way of attacking the fraudulence paradox in terms of reducing a self-hatred part that reinforced the fear, and a consequent drive to try to manipulate people and providing the very approval I denied myself. Dr. G's term for approval was validation. This period was pretty much the zenith of my career in analysis, and for a few weeks, during a couple which I actually didn't see Dr. Gustafsson at all, because some sort of complication in his illness required him to go into the hospital. And when he came back, he appeared to have lost not only weight, but some kind of essential part of his total mass. It no longer seemed too large for his little desk chair, which still squeaked, but now not as loudly. Plus, a lot of the clutter and papers had been straightened up and put in several brown cardboard banker boxes against the wall under the two sad prints. When I came back, the seeing the absence of mess was especially disturbing and sad for some reason. It was true that I felt some of the first genuine hope I'd had since the early self-deluded part of the experiment with Naperville's Church of the Flaming Sword of the Redeemer. And yet at the same time, these weeks also more or less directly led to my decision to kill myself. Although I'm going to have to simplify and linearize a great deal of interior stuff in order to convey to you what actually happened. Otherwise it would take an almost literal eternity to recount it. We already agreed about that. It's not that words or human language stop having a meaning or relevance after you die, by the way. It's more the specific one after the other temporal ordering of them that does. Or doesn't. It's hard to explain. In logical terms, something expressed in words will still have the same cardinality, but no longer the same ordinality. All the different words are still there, in other words, but it's no longer a question of which one comes first. I can say it's no longer a series of words, but now marks some limit towards which the series converges. It's hard not to want to put it in logical terms, since they're the most abstract and universal, meaning they have no connotation. You don't feel anything about them. Maybe imagine everything anybody on Earth ever said or even thought to themselves, all getting collapsed and exploding into one large, combined, instantaneous sound. Although instantaneous is a little misleading, since it implies other instants before and after, and it isn't really like that. It's more like a sudden internal flash where you see or realize something. A sudden flash or whatever of empathy or insight. It's not just that it happens way faster and you could break the process down and arrange it into English, but that it happens on a scale in which there isn't even time to be aware of any sort of time at all in which it's happening. The flash. All you know, there's a before and an after, and afterward you're different. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to give it to you from several different angles. It's all the same thing. Or you could think of it as being more a certain configuration of light than a word sum or a series of sounds too afterward. Which is in fact true, or as the theorem's proof, because if a proof is true, then it's true everywhere and all the time, not just when you happen to say it. The thing is that it turns out that the logical symbolism really would be the best way to express it, because logic is totally abstract and outside what we think of as time. It's the closest thing to what it's really like. That's why it's logical paradoxes that really drive people nuts. A lot of history's great logicians have ended up killing themselves. That is a fact. And keep in mind that this flash can happen anywhere, at any time. Here's the basic barrier paradox, by the way. If you might want an example of why logicians with incredible firepower can devote their whole lives to solving these things and still end up beating their heads against the wall. This one has to do with big numbers, meaning really big. Past the trillion, past the 10 to the trillion, way up there. When you get way up there, it takes a while even to describe this big in words. The quantity 1,403,000,000,000 to the trillionth power takes 20 syllables to describe, for example. You get the idea. Now, even higher up in there is these huge, cosmic scale numbers. Imagine now the very smallest number that can't be described in under 22 syllables. The paradox is that the very smallest number that can't be described in under 22 syllables, which of course is itself a descriptor of this number, only has 21 syllables in it, which of course is under 22 syllables. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? At the same time, what actually led to it in casual terms though, occurred maybe during the third or fourth week that Dr. G was back seeing patients after his hospitalization. Although I'm not going to pretend that the specific incident wouldn't strike most people as absurd or even sort of insipid as causes go, the truth is it's just that late at night, one night in August after Dr. G's return, when I couldn't sleep, which happened a lot ever since the cocaine period, and was thinking of drinking lots of milk or something, and watching television, flipping the remote almost at random between different cable stations the way you do when it's late, I happened on part of an old Cheers episode from late in the series run, where the analyst character, Fraser, who went on to have his own show, and Lilith, his fiancée and also an analyst. Or just entering a stage set of the underground tavern, and Fraser is asking how her work day at the office went, and Lilith says, "If I have one more yuppie come in and start whining to me about how we can't love, I'm going to throw up." This line got a huge laugh from the show's studio audience, which indicated that they, and so by demographic extension the whole national audience at home as well, recognized what a cliche and melodramatic type of complaint the inability to love concept was. And sitting there, when I suddenly realized that once again managed to con myself, this time into thinking this was a truer and more promising way to conceive the problem of fraudulence. And by extension, that I'd also somehow deluded myself into almost believing that poor old Dr. Gustafsson had anything in his mental arsenal that could actually help me, and that the real truth was probably more that I was continuing to seem partially out of pity, and partially so I could pretend to myself that I was taking steps to become more authentic, when in fact all I was doing was jerking a gratefully ill shell of a guy around and feeling superior to him, because I was able to analyze his own psychological makeup so much more accurately than he could analyze mine. The flash of realizing all this at the very same time that the huge audience laugh showed that nearly everybody in the United States has probably already seen through this complaint's inauthenticity as long ago as whenever the episode had originally run. All this flashed through my head in the tiny interval it took to realize what I was watching, and to remember who the hell the characters of Fraser and Lilith even were. I mean, maybe half a second at most. And it more or less destroyed me. That's the only way I can describe it. As if whatever hope of any way out of the trap I'd made for myself had been blasted out of midair or laughed off the stage. As if I were one of those stock comic characters who was always both the butt of the joke and the only person not to get the joke. And in sum, I went to bed feeling as fraudulent, befogged, hopeless, and full of self-contempt as I'd ever felt. And it was the next morning after that I woke up having decided I was going to kill myself and end the whole farce. As you probably recall, Cheers was an incredibly popular series, and even in syndication, its metro numbers were so high that if a local advertiser wanted to buy time on it, the slots cost so much that you pretty much had to build his whole local strategy around those slots. I'm compressing a huge amount of what took place in my psyche that next to last night, all the different realizations and conclusions I reached as I lay there in bed, unable to sleep or even move. No single serious lines or audience laugh is in of itself going to constitute a reason for suicide, of course. Although to you, I imagine it probably didn't seem all that compressed at all. You're thinking, here's this guy going on, and why doesn't he get to the part where he kills himself and explain or account for the fact that he's sitting here next to me in a piece of high-powered machinery, telling me all this as if he died in 1991. Which, in fact, I knew I would from the moment I first woke up. It was over. I decided to end the charade. After breakfast, I called in sick to work and stayed home the whole day by myself. I knew if I was around anyone, I automatically lapsed in the fraudulence. I decided to take a whole lot of Benadryl, and then just as I got really sleepy and relaxed, I get the car up to top speed in the rural roadway out in the extreme west suburbs and drive it head-on to a concrete bridge abutment. Benadryl makes me extremely foggy and sleepy. It always has. I spent most of the morning on letters to my lawyer and CPA and brief notes to the creative head and managing partner who had originally brought me aboard at Samiti and Shane. Our creative group was in the middle of some very ticklish campaign preparations, and I want to apologize for in any way leaving them in the lurch. Of course, I didn't really feel that sorry. Samiti and Shane was a ballet of fraudulence, and I was well out of it. And that was probably ultimately just so the people who really mattered at SNC would be more apt to remember me as a decent, conscientious guy, who it turned out was just maybe a little too sensitive and tormented by his personal demons, almost too good for this world. It's why I seemed to be unable to keep from fantasizing a lot of them saying after news of it came through. I did not write Mr. Gustafsson a note. He had his own share of problems, and I knew that in a note I'd spent a lot of time trying to seem as if I was being honest, but really just dancing around the truth, which was that he was a deeply repressed homosexual or androgynous and had no real business charging patients, then project his own maladjustments onto them. and that the truth was that he'd be doing himself and everybody else a favor if he'd just go over to Garfield Park and blow somebody in the bushes and try honestly to decide if he liked it or not, and that was a total fraud for continuing to drive all the way into River Forest to see him and bat him around like a catnip toy while telling myself there was some possible, non-fraudulent point to it. All of which, of course, even if they weren't dying of colon cancer right in front of you, could still never actually come out and say to somebody, since certain truths might well destroy them. And who has that, right? I did spend almost 2 hours before taking the first of the Benadryl, composing a handwritten note to my sister Fern. In a note, I apologized for whatever pain my suicide and the fraudulence and or inability to love has precipitated might cause her and my stepdad, who was still alive and well and now lived in Marin County, California, where he taught part-time and did community outreach with Marin County's homeless. I also used the occasion of the letter and all sort of last testament urgency associated with it to license apologizing to Fern about manipulating my step-parents into believing that she'd lied about the antique glass bowl in 1967. As well as for a half a dozen other incidents in spite of her fraudulent actions that I knew I had caused her pain, and I had felt bad about ever since, but had never really seen any way to broach with her or express my honest regret for. It turns out there are things you can discuss in a suicide note that would just be too bizarre if expressed in any other kind of venue. Just one example of such an incident was during a period in the mid-70s, when Fern, as part of puberty, underwent some physical changes that made her look chunky for a year or two. Not fat, but wide-hipped and bosomy and sort of much more broad than she'd been as a preteen. And of course she was very, very sensitive about it. Puberty also being a time of terrible self-consciousness and sensitivity about one's body image, of course. So much so that my step-parents took great pains never to say anything about Fern's new breath, or even ever to bring up any topics related to eating habits, diet and exercise, etc., etc. And I, for my own part, never said anything about it either. Not directly, but I had worked out all kinds of very subtle and indirect ways to torment Fern about her size in such a way that my step-parents never saw anything, and I could never really be accused of anything that I couldn't then look all around myself with a shocked, incredulous facial expression as if I had no idea what she was talking about, such as just a quick raise of my eyebrow when her eyes met mine as she was having a second helping at dinner, or a quick little quiet, "Is sure you can fit into that?" when she came home from the store with a new skirt. The one I still remember the most vividly involved the second-floor hall of our house, which was in Aurora and was a 3-story home, including a basement, but not that spacious or large, meaning a skinny 3-decker like so many you always see all canned together alongside residential streets in Naperville and Aurora. The second-floor hallway, which ran between Fern's room and the top of the stairway on one end and my room and the second-floor bathroom on the other, was cramped and somewhat narrow, but not anywhere close to as narrow as I would pretend it was whenever Fern and I passed each other in it, with me squashing my back against the hallway wall and splitting my arms out and wincing as if there would barely be enough room for somebody of her unbelievable breath and squeeze past me, and she would never say anything or even look at me when I did it, but would just go on past me into the bathroom and close the door. But I knew it must have hurt her. A little while later, she entered an adolescent period where she hardly ate anything at all, and she smoked cigarettes and chewed several packs of gum a day, and used a lot of makeup. And for a while she got so thin that she looked angular and a bit like an insect. Although, of course, I never said that. And I once, through the bedroom's keyhole, overheard a brief conversation which my stepmother said she was worried because she didn't think Fern was having her normal time of the month anymore because she had gotten so underweight. And she and my stepfather discussed the possibility of taking her to see some kind of specialist. That period passed on its own, but in the letter I told Fern that I always remembered this, and certain other periods where I'd been crueler trying to make her feel bad, and that I regretted them very much. Though I said I wouldn't want to seem so egotistical as to think a simple apology could erase any of the hurt I caused her when we were growing up. On the other hand, I also assured her that it wasn't as if I'd gone around for years carrying excessive guilt or blowing these incidents out of all proportion. They were not life-altering traumas or anything like that, and In many ways, they were probably all too typical of the sorts of cruelties that kids tend to inflict on each other growing up. I also assured her that neither of these incidents, nor her worse about them, had anything to do with my killing myself. I simply said, without going into anything like the level of detail I'd given you, because my purpose in the letter was of course very different, that I was killing myself because I was an essentially fraudulent person who seemed to lack either the character or the firepower to find a way to stop, even after I'd realized my fraudulence and a terrible toll it exacted. Alright. We're getting close to the end. My throat's starting to hurt, so I'm gonna take a bit of a break. It's been... And I also need to feed my cat real quick. So basically BRB, we're taking a little bit of a break. When I'm back, we'll finish the shit out of this story. I'm so invested. This guy has so many problems. And we're gonna find out what those problems are in like a few minutes. I'll be back. Okay. Ah. Hello. I'm back. I also hope, I didn't say this earlier, but I hope people appreciate my choice in atmospheric music today. Because I was searching for like spooky sounds to put on the background, and like two of the results were like, oh my god, I got so jump scared by this. I'm like, oh. Is there anything that doesn't have a jump scare? But I'm back. My throat has recovered somewhat, and I'm ready to finish the story. I'm very invested. Where was I? Here. I told her nothing about the various different realizations or paradoxes. What would be the point? I also inserted there was also a good possibility that, when all was said and done, I was nothing but just another fast-track yuppie who couldn't love, and I found the banality as unendurable, largely because I was evidently so hollow and insecure that I had a pathological need to see myself as somehow exceptional or outstanding at all times. Without going into much explanation or argument, I also told Fern that if her initial reaction to these reasons for my killing myself was to think I was being too much too hard on myself, then she should know that I was already aware that that was the most likely reaction on my note would produce in her, and had probably deliberately constructed the note to at least in part prompt just that reaction. Just the way my whole life had often said and done things designed to prompt certain people to believe that I was a genuinely outstanding person whose personal standards were so high that he was far too hard on himself, which in turn made me appear attractively modest and unsmug, and was a big reason for my popularity with so many people in all different avenues of my life. What Beverly Lisbeth Lane had termed my talent for ingration, but was nevertheless basically calculated and fraudulent. I also told Fern that I loved her very much, and asked her to relay the same sentiments to Marin County for me. Now we're getting to the part where I actually killed myself. This occurred at 9:17 p.m. on August 9th, 1991, if you want time fixed precisely. Plus, I'll spare you most of the last couple hours' preparations and back and forth conflict and dithering, which there was a lot of. Suicide runs so counter to so many hardwired instincts and drives that nobody in his right mind goes through with it without going through a great deal of internal back and forth, intervals of almost changing your mind, etc. The German logician Kant was right in this respect. Human beings are all pretty much identical in terms of our hardwiring. Although we are seldom conscious of it, we're all basically just instruments or expressions of our evolutionary drives, which are then themselves the expressions of forces are infinitely larger and more important than we are. Although actually being conscious of this is a whole different matter. So I won't even really try to describe this several different times that day when I sat in my living room and had a furious mental back and forth about whether to actually go through with it. For one thing, it was intensely mental and would take an enormous amount of time to put into words. Plus it would come off as somewhat cliche or banal in the sense that many of the thoughts and associations were basically the same sort of generic things that almost anybody who's confronting imminent death will end up thinking. As in, this is the last time I'll ever tie my shoe. This is the last time I'll look at the rubber tree on top of the stereo cabinet. How delicious this lungful of air right here tastes. This is the last glass of milk I'll ever drink. What a totally priceless gift this totally ordinary sight of the wind picking trees branches up and moving them around is. Or, I will never again hear the plaintive sound of the fridge going on in the kitchen. The kitchen and the breakfast nook are right off my living room, etc., etc. Or, I won't see the sun come up tomorrow, or watch the bedroom gradually undim and resolve, etc., etc. And at the same time, trying to summon the memory of the exact way the sun comes up over the human fields in the wet-looking I-55 ramp that lay due east of my bedroom's sliding glass door in the morning. It had been a hot, wet August, and if I went through with killing myself, I wouldn't ever get to feel the incremental cooling and drying that starts here around mid-September. Or to see the leaves turn and hear them rustle along the edge of the courtyard outside S&C's floor of the building on S. Dearborn. Or see snow and put a shovel and bag of sand in the trunk, or bite into a perfectly ripe, ungrainy pear, or put a piece of toilet paper on a shaving cut, etc. If I went in and went to the bathroom and brushed my teeth, it would be the last time I did those things. I sat there and thought about that, looking at the rubber tree. Everything seemed to tremble a little. The way things reflected in water will tremble. I watched the sun begin to drop down over the townhouse developments going up south at Darian's Corporation Limit on Lily Cash Road, and realized that I would never see a newest home's construction and landscape completed, or that the home's white insulation wrapped with the trademark train name Tvek all over it flapping the wind out here would one day have vinyl sliding or play brick and color-coordinated shutters over it. And I wouldn't see this happen or be able to drive by and know what was exactly written there under all the nice exteriors. Or the breakfast nook window's view of the big farms field next to my development, with the plowed furrows all parallel so that if I lean and line their lines up just right, they seem to all rush together toward the horizon as if shot at something huge. You get the idea. Basically, I was in that state in which a man realizes that everything he sees will outlast him. As a verbal construction, I know it's a cliche. A state in which to actually be, though, it's something else, believe me. When out, every movement takes on a kind of ceremonial aspect. The very sacredness of the world as seen. The same kind of state Dr. G will try to describe with analogies to oceans and whitecaps and trees. You might recall I mentioned this already. This is literally about 1/1 trillionth of the various thoughts and internal experiences I underwent in those last few hours. And I'll spare both of us recounting any more, since I'm aware it ends up seeming somewhat lame. Which in fact, it wasn't, but I won't pretend it was fully authentic or genuine either. A part of me was still calculating, performing, and this was part of the ceremonial quality that last afternoon. Even as I wrote my note to Fern, for instance, expressing sentiments and regrets that were real, a part of me was noticing what a fine and sincere note it was, and anticipating the effect of Fern on this or that heartfelt phrase, while the other part was observing the whole scene of a man in a dress shirt and no tie sitting at his breakfast nook, writing a heartfelt note on his last afternoon alive. The Bondwood's table surface trembling with sunlight, and the man's hand steady and face both haunted by regret and ennobled by resolve. This part of me is sort of hovering above and just to the left of myself, evaluating the scene and thinking what a fine and genuine seeming performance in a drama would make, if only we all had not already been subject to countless scenes just like it in dramas ever since we first saw a movie or read a book, which somehow entailed that real scenes like that one in my suicide note were now compelling and genuine only to their participants, and to anyone else it would come off as banal and even somewhat cheesy or maudlin, which is somewhat paradoxical when you consider, as I did, sitting there at the breakfast nook, that the reason scenes like this will seem stale or manipulative to an audience is that we've already seen so many of them in dramas, and yet the reason we've seen so many of them in dramas is the scenes really are dramatic and compelling, and let people communicate very deep, complicated emotional realities that are almost impossible to articulate in any other way. At the same time, still another facet or part of me realizing that, from this perspective, my own basic problem was that at an early age I'd somehow chosen to cast my lot with the life's drama's supposed audience instead of with the drama itself, and that I even now was watching, engaging my supposed performance's quality and probable effects, and thus was, in the final analysis, the very same manipulative fraud, writing the note to Fern that had been throughout my life, that had brought me to this climactic scene of writing and signing it and addressing the envelope and affixing postage and putting the envelope in my shirt pocket, totally conscious of the resonance of its resting there, next to my heart, in the scene, planning to drop in a mailbox on the way out to Lily Cash Road, and the bridge abundance into which I planned to drive my car at speeds sufficient to splice the whole front end and impale me on the steering wheel and instantly kill me. Self-loathing is not the same as being into pain or a lingering death. If I was going to do it, I wanted it instant. On Lily Cash, the Braid abundance and side steep banks support State Route 4, also known as the Braidwood Highway. As it crosses overhead on a cement overpass so covered with the graffiti that most of it you can't even read. Which sort of defeats the purpose of graffiti, in my opinion. The abundance themselves are just off the road and about as wide as this car. Plus, the intersection is isolated way out in the countryside around Romeoville, 10 or so miles south of the southwest suburbs limits. It is the true boonies. The only homes are farms set way back from the road and embellished with silos and barns, etc., etc. At night in the summer, the dew point is high and there's always fog. It's farm country. I never once passed under 4 here without seeming to be the only thing on either road. The corn high in the fields like a green ocean all around. Insects the only real noise. Driving alone under creamy stars and the little cocked sights of the moon, etc. etc. The idea was to have the accident, and whatever explosion fire was involved, occur someplace isolated enough that no one else would see it, so that there would be as little an aspect of performance to the thing as I could manage, and no temptation to spend the last few seconds trying to imagine what impression the sight and sound of the impact might make on someone watching. I was partially concerned that it might be spectacular and dramatic, and might look as if the driver was trying to go out in as dramatic a way as possible. This is the sort of shit we waste our lives thinking about. The ground fog tends to get more intense by the second until it seems that the whole world is just what's in your headlights reach. High beams don't work in fog. They only make things worse. You can go ahead and try them, but you'll see what happens. All they do is light up the fog so it seems even denser. That's kind of a minor paradox that sometimes you can actually see farther with low beams than high. Alright, and there's construction, all the flapping to Vic wrap on the houses. That if you really do it, you'll never see anyone live in. Although it won't hurt. It really will be instant, I can tell you that much. The field's insects are almost deafening. If the corn's high like this and you watch as the sun sets, you can practically watch them rise out of the fields like some great figure's shadow rising. Mostly mosquitoes. I don't know what all they are. It's a whole insect universe in there that none of us will ever see or know anything about. Plus, you'll notice that the Benadryl doesn't help all that much once you're underway. That whole idea was probably ill-conceived. Alright, now you're coming to what I promised and led you through, the whole dull synopsis of what led up to this in the hopes of. Meaning, what it's like to die. What happens? Right? This is what everyone wants to know. And you do, trust me. Whether you decide to go through with it or not, whether I somehow talk you out of it the way you think I'm going to try to do or not, it's not what anyone thinks, for one thing. The truth is, you already know what it's like. You already know the difference between the size and the speed of everything that flashes through you, and a tiny inadequate bit of it, all you can ever let anyone know. As though inside you is this enormous room full of whatever seems like everything the whole universe at one time or another, and yet the only parts that get out have to somehow squeeze out through one of those tiny keyholes you see under the knob in older doors. As if we're all trying to see each other through those tiny keyholes. But it does have a knob. The door can open. But not the way you think. But what if you could? Think for a second. What if all the infinitely dense and shifting worlds of stuff inside you, every moment of your life, turned out to be somehow fully open and expressible afterward? After what you think of as you has died? Because what if afterward now, each moment itself is an infinite sea or span or passage of time in which to express it or convey it, and you don't even need any organized English. You can, as I say, open a door and be in anyone else's room in all your multi-form forms and ideas and facets. Because, listen, we don't have much time. Here's where Lily Cash slips slightly down and the bank starts getting steep. You could just make it the outline so the unlit sign for the farmstead is never open anymore, the last time before the bridge. So listen, what exactly do you think you are? The millions and trillions of thoughts, memories, juxtapositions, even crazy ones like this you're thinking, that flash through your head and disappear? Some or remainder of these? Your history? Do you know how long it's been since I told you I was a fraud? Do you remember you were looking at the recipient watch hanging from the rearview and seeing time, 9:17? What are you looking at right now? Coincidence? What if no time has passed at all? The truth is, you've already heard this. That this is what it's like. That it's what makes room for the universe inside you. All the endless inbent fractals or connections, symphonies, different voices, infinities you can never show another soul. And you think it makes you a fraud, that tiny fraction anyone else ever sees? Of course you're a fraud. Of course what people see is never you. And of course you know this. And of course you try and manage what part they see it, if you know it's only a part. Who wouldn't? It's called free will, Sherlock. But at the same time, it's why it feels so good to break down and cry in front of others, or to laugh, or speak in tongues, or chin Bengali. It's not English anymore. It's not getting squeezed through any hole. Okay, long ass note. One clue that there's something not quite real about sequential time, the way you experience it, is the various paradoxes of time supposedly passing into a so-called present that's always unrolling into the future and creating more and more past behind it. As if the present were this car. Nice car, by the way. And the past is a road we've just gone over. And the future is the headlit road up ahead we haven't yet gotten to. And time is the car's forward movement, and the precise present is the car's front bumper as it cuts through the fog of the future. So it's now, and a tiny bit later, a whole different now, etc. Except if time is really passing, how far does it go? What rate does the present change? See? Meaning if we use time to measure motion or rate, which we do, it's the only way you can. 95 miles per hour, 70 heartbeats a minute, etc. etc. How are you supposed to measure the rate at which time moves? 1 second per second? It makes no sense. You can't even talk about time flowing or moving without hitting up against paradox right away. So think for a second. What if there's really no movement at all? What if this is all unfolding in the one flash you call the present? This first, infinitely tiny split second of impact when the speeding car's front bumper is just starting to touch the abutment, just before the bumper crumples and displaces the front end and you go violently forward, and the steering column comes back at your chest as if shot out something enormous. Meaning that, what if in fact this now is infinite and never really passes in a way that your mind is supposed to be wired to understand pass? So that not only your whole life, but every single humanly conceivable way to describe and account for that life has time to flash like neon shaped into those connected cursive letters that business signs and windows love so much they use through your mind all at once in the literally immeasurable instance between impact and death, just as you start forward to meet the wheel at a rate there we go. Just as you start forward to meet the wheel at a rate no belt ever made could restrain. The end. Time. What a funny thing. Time could go slower though. Like when I need to sleep in. So cry all you want. I won't tell anybody. But it wouldn't have made you a fraud to change your mind. It would be sad to do it because you think you somehow have to. It won't hurt though. It'll be loud, and you'll feel things, but they'll go through you so fast that you won't even realize you're feeling them. Which is sort of like the paradox I used to bounce off goof stuffs on. Is it possible to be a fraud if you aren't aware you're a fraud? In the very brief moment of fire, you'll feel will almost be good. Like when your hands are cold and there's a fire and you hold out your hands out towards it. The reality is, dying isn't bad, but it takes forever. And that forever is no time at all. I know it sounds like a contradiction, or maybe just wordplay. What it really is, it turns out, is a matter of perspective. The big picture, as they say, in which the fact is that this whole seemingly endless back and forth between us has come and gone and come again in the very same instant that Fern stares at bowling pad for dinner, and her stepfather packs some pipe tobacco down with his thumb, and Angela Mead uses an ingenious little catalog tool to roll cat hair off her blouse, and Melissa bets and hails to respond to something she thinks her husband just said, and Davis Wallace blinks in the midst of idly scanning class photos from his 1980 Aurora West high school yearbook and seeing my photo and trying, through the little tiny keyhole of himself, to imagine all must have happened to lead up to my death in the furious single-car accident he'd read about in 1991. Like what sorts of pain or problems might have driven the guy to get in his electric blue Corvette and try the drive with all the OTC medication in his bloodstream. David Wallace happening to have a huge and totally unorganizable set of inner thoughts, feelings, memories, and impressions of this little photos guy a year ahead of him in school with the seemingly almost a neon aura around him all the time of scholastic and athletic excellence and popularity and success with the ladies, as well as of every last cutting remark or even tiny disgusted gesture or expression on this guy's part whenever David Wallace struck out looking like a Legion ball or said something dumb at a party, and of how impressive and authentically at ease in the world the guys always seemed. like an actual living person instead of the dithering, pathetically self-conscious outline or ghost of a person David Wallace knew himself back then to be. Verily, a fair-haired, fast-track guy, whom in the very best human tradition David Wallace had back then imagined as happy and unreflective and wholly unhaunted by voices telling him there was something deeply wrong with him that wasn't wrong with anybody else, and he had to spend all of his time and energy trying to figure out what to do and say in order to impersonate an even marginally normal, acceptable U.S. male. All this stuff clinging around in David Wallace's 1981's head every second, moving so fast they never got a chance to catch hold, and try to fight or argue against or really even feel it, except as a knot in his stomach, as he stood in his real parents' kitchen, ironing his uniform, thinking of all the ways he could screw up and strike out, looking or drop balls out and right and reveal his true pathetic essence in front of this .418 hitter and his witchily pretty sister and everyone else in the audience in lawn chairs in the grass along the sides of the Elysian field. All of whom probably saw it through the sham from the outset anyway, he was pretty sure. In other words, David Wallace trying, if only in the second his lids are down, to somehow reconcile what this luminous guy had seemed like from the outside, whatever on the interior must have driven him to kill himself in such a dramatic and doubtlessly painful way. But David Wallace also fully aware of the cliche that you can't ever truly know what's going on inside it. Somebody else is hoary and insipid, and yet at the same time trying very consciously to prohibit that awareness from mocking the attempt or sending the whole line of thought into that sort of inbent spiral that keeps her from ever getting anywhere. Considerable time having passed since 1981, of course. And David Wallace having emerged from years of literally indescribable war against himself with quite a bit more firepower than he had at Aurora West. The realer, more enduring and sentimental part of himself, commanding the other part to be silent, as if looking it levelly in the eye and saying, almost aloud, not another word. That's it. That's the end of the story. I took a traumatic response. That was really good. I heard this was really good, but that was really good. Honestly, I think my favorite part was trying to talk about, like, the stuff he did to his sister. It just felt so real in that moment, and, like, wondering, like, what is death? What is a life? What is the time that we remember it in? Those flashes of memory. What is the weight of those truly? And, like, you could tell this is the kind of, like, guy that, like, thinks himself into circles. Like, there's a lot of, like, thinking himself into circles here, and that in the end was the problem. This, like, idea of himself that tormented him, like some kind of other like literal like ghost of what he thought he was and what everyone else saw, and you can see the way he's like convinced he's a certain kind of person and that's making himself miserable, and how it's like also like he also thinks it's like a unchangeable part and there's nothing that can be done about that. I think there's a lot of people like that who are like convinced that they are like a certain person, but that they also cannot like be anything but that person. Like basically just trap themselves in the idea of like what they have to be. Like someone who's like, oh, I'm not good at things, and constantly feels the need to remind other people of it, and constantly like holds himself back from doing things, and then they get proven right because they don't succeed at doing anything because they can't bring themselves to do anything. Or the people that are like, oh, well, I'm bad at maintaining friendships, and then they proceed to literally like sabotage their own relationships with other people as a self-fulfilling prophecy of you're bad at something. That's what I see I think that's what I see from this story. This guy isn't really like a fraud, like he could be like a manipulator, definitely, but not every moment of his life. But at the end of the day, he has made up an image of himself in his head, and I think that he just can't seem to get away from, is how I see it. It's a very interesting story about someone who's just he basically talks himself to death. Talks himself to all these paradoxes and circles until he just gets sick of it all. It's like, I have to die. But yeah, I think it's scarier than any horror story. Is the self. Now that's terrifying stuff, really. And that took 2 hours. Oh shit, that was really long, but it was good. It's called Good Old Neon. If you ever want to like open up yourself and give it another, probably a bit like another read through, because I definitely am gonna want to read this through by myself at some point. It definitely does also capture the feeling of a internal monologue very well, I feel. Just the way it just constantly switches from like topic to topic, and like it's like ceaseless rambling. Feels very like monologue-y, but there's still like a thread of logic. It's not like it's just like going to like wait. It's not like it's like switching between like way too many things at once, and just I can see like a line of logic the way it goes through things. I like it. My throat's so itchy. Alright. It's been a couple hours. I could read like I think like a chapter of this thing, and maybe I'll like tie it off for the night, because I'm a bit sleepy, I must admit. I started late and I was already sleepy, but I want to read more because I love reading. So yeah, we could put this one aside. I liked it. It gets a very good score for me. I very much enjoyed taking up that recommendation from the newsletter I subscribed to. But yeah, let's check out this story. I want to read let's read at least one chapter of this. Let's see how long that takes. My throat's already. Oh, I was getting into it on the first one. But yeah, I read chapter 1 of this last week, so we can read chapter 2, and then next week I'll find some more little stories to pick at, some little short ones, and maybe even check out the first couple chapters of another web serial. My favorite thing to do would just get a couple chapters, see if it hooks anybody. One of my favorite things to do, even. I remember there's one I read on stream, like, exclusively a while back, and it hasn't updated in ages, but it was really good. It did a lot of really fun stuff. If it ever comes back, I'm reading it here, and I'm catching everybody up, you'll see. Regardless. Chapter 2, Conquest in the Hand. Of this story someone dropped in, wanted me to read. Heroes of Hayark. The first chapter is pretty promising. It's like a little like, fantasy-esque setting, so I'm curious to see what the next chapter has in store for us. Hamond walked up to the table and took a seat. He wished yet again that they had picked a better tavern for their meeting, but for some reason, they preferred the Golden Cock. The name was a lie, of course, as clearly not a speck of gold had ever passed through the cabin's doors. It was as run down a tavern as he could hope to find this side of Hayark, with warped tables, wobbly chairs, and windows darkened with dust and dirt. Alexios and Bradan both swore by the beer brewed here, although Hamon didn't quite grasp why. It wasn't terrible by any measure, but it tasted far better drinks than what the tavern sold. Still, he supposed he had become used to this place, given that it had been a regular meeting spot for some time now. Even if he'd rather they could go to one of the Howlscraft's better taverns. Turning his head, the sound of the door swinging open, spinning a light across the room. He saw Bradan standing there, wiry and as unkempt as ever. Calvarel was following right behind him, his long curly hair hanging down around his shoulders. The pair stepped in, and a door thudded shut behind them, darkening the tavern once more. Braden quickly spotted Hamon with a glance, and beckoning Cal, the two approached. Heh, you're actually first this time, Braden remarked as he and Carvarel settled in the chairs. Wasn't as busy today, Hamon said. I just had to see a child earlier, and he only had slight fever. I didn't even need to be there, really. Well, if you need some work, I have something for you, Calvarel said. Got a handful of children getting ready for the first ascension. You know old Morrigible will need the help. Hamon let out a sigh. More and more of his work is spent taking care of illnesses and injuries among the LFA, since their own healer was getting up there in the years. He'd rather not put himself as the focus of the attention surrounding the LFA, but someone had to be there. The other healers refused to handle such matters, and so it fell to him. I'll speak to him about it when I get the chance, he told Calvarel. I don't think I have anyone to visit tomorrow afternoon. Hear, hear, Calvarel said with a smile, relaxed. Knew I could count on you, unlike a certain someone. Where is Alex, anyway? Can be ours to come drink with us? I wouldn't expect him, Brayden chimed in. Word is that the Lord's son is back in town. They probably all have duty or have a watch on duty or something. I was hoping to not have only 3 people for our rounds tonight, Hamon grumbled. It just didn't quite work with how the cards got divided. You know, Conquest is just fine with 3 players, Brayden said, pulling the set of cards out of a belt pouch and setting on the table. Even if I don't get to take his coin tonight. You were never going to take it anyway, Calvarel shot back. Anyway, might as well weigh it out. He fished out a set of worn coins. 5 pikers on this round. I'll match it. Hamon pulled out his own coins for the bet. I'm tempted to raise it to a full hexty, Brayden said with a chuckle. But you two are just too poor, so I'll go down to your level. Upgame his coins. Rich points and laughs. Someone's got a full purse, Calvarel said as he reached for the deck of cards to cut it. I need to ask you for a bigger cut next time. Hamon just shook his head. He had no doubt whatsoever that Calvarel and Bradden's business together was shady, but he wasn't about to ask too many questions about it. He would not pry into their secrets, and they would not pry into his. A strong friendship. One Hamon had no intention of ruining. You fellas want drinks? The barmaid said, walking up to them. Hamon did not recognize her, but wasn't like he had particularly paid attention to the barmaids here before, he admitted to himself. 3 beers on me, Brayden answered, not taking his eyes off of Calvarel's card handling. Hamon hoped Calvarel had learned his lesson about trying to cheat at cards, but clearly Brayden wasn't trusting his LFA partner. I could have paid, Calvarel protested as the barmaid left to go get the drinks. Don't worry about it, Cal, Brayden answered. Bless about the soldiers back of the Lord's son. I'll make it back many times over. I know I've got what they need. Will you make it back what you lose at cards? Hamon asked with a fairly innocent tone. Oh, shut up, came the retort. As Calvarel finally dealt the cards, the barmaid returned and set a mug in front of each of them. Brayden fished out another handful of pikers and handed them to the barmaid. Hamon took a sip, then picked up his hand. Not bad, he thought to himself. He got both 5s of swords, along with the 3 banners and 2 crowns. The conquest of 5s and off the table for the other 2. He'd have a decent chance of setting up the win for winning with that. Brayden reached over and casually flipped the desktop card into the table, revealing a 4 of swords. Let's play, he said, nodding Hamon to indicate that he had the first turn. Taking a brief moment to study their faces, Hamon realized both Brayden and Calvarel were keeping their expressions neutral. Trying to do the same, Hamon played a 5 of swords, then drew 2 cards. A 4 crowns and a rogue, with which he could work with. Anyway, Cal, Brayden spoke as he placed down 2 of swords. Wasn't the elf elders trying to get you set up with a wife? I thought you mentioned something about it last time we got together. Yeah, she seemed nice enough. Absolutely cute, and I figured settling down wouldn't be so bad. Calvarel took a swig of his drink. Thing is, some of my folks keep telling me we should have a traditional wedding and such, and we don't want any part of it. Yeah, I'm sure you want to marry another man and woman to go with her. Brayden slapped his knee with a laugh as Calvarel grimaced. Hamon also grimaced, but for a different reason, as Calvarel had just played a rough card. Neither of us do, Calvarel explained. I don't think most elves like me really want it anymore, but the elders gotta have their way. Keep talking about the code for this and the belief in that. Even heard a bunch of other elves sign up for the war just so they could get away from this nonsense. Sort of wish I had done that. Well, then you wouldn't be here now, Hamon noted, playing his next card. I know, I'm better off for it. Still, I need to stop being arses and realize that times change. Calvarel took another drink, then chuckled. Hey, maybe we should have a traditional Muad'Dib wedding instead. That'll show them. If you're asking me, I've never been to Remuat, Hamon pointed out. Having a heritage of his mother brought up was unpleasant, and he'd rather forget it, even if his brown skin served as a reminder of it every day. I wouldn't know of a Remuati wedding if I saw it, or even if I was the one getting married. To be fair, I would have bet good pikers you were getting married for Cal here, Brayden said. You're a reliable type. Not the most exciting man around, but at least you keep food on the table. I definitely need to ask for a bigger cut, Calvaro said no in particular. I'm afraid my work as a healer keeps me too busy going to meet girls, Hamon noted. Another card went onto the growing pile. Didn't you say you weren't all that busy today? Brayden said, with a smirk. Hamon figured that the man probably thought he'd perfectly set a trap. Tending to people, yes, but I have to go buy fresh herbs and blankets. That's the thing most people didn't get about being a healer. It's more than just waving your hands over an injury that could go away. Not everything could be solved with incantations. A lesson Hamon had learned years ago. Herbs I get, but why the blankets? Did someone bleed on them or something? Calvaro asked sarcastically. Nasty. Brayden said with a shudder. Do I want to know why you didn't just get the call on them at their home? No, you don't, Hamon answered, looking over his hand. His effort to gather a conquest of fives was not going so well. Well, that's why you're the healer, and we're not. As he spoke, Calvaro played another card, and Hamon had to struggle to hold in a groan. That was the second 5 of banners in play. He'd have to pivot to a completely different conquest set, and he didn't even know how much time he had to do so. I can't see either of you two being a healer, no. Hamon shook his head, deciding now was as good time as any to play a rogue. I'll just have to handle enough healing for the 3 of us. Good, because you're way better than playing cards, Brayden said with a laugh, throwing 4 cards down. Conquest of 3s. You arse, Calvaro swore, staring at the cards in his hand. After a moment, he sighed and laid his hand face down. You got me. I'm out. I don't have to be better at cards than I am at healing. Hamon played the 3 of banners. I just have to be better at cards than you. Son of a... Curse you! Brayden pounded the table as Calvaro burst out laughing. Hamon couldn't resist grinning himself. Now with my 3 cards a Monte, Brayden almost certainly wouldn't be able to make a comeback. The only question was how many rogues the man had in hand. I think there's a lesson to be learned here, Calvaro commented dryly, after the laughter had died down. That being, of course, don't bet against the healer, Hamon replied. The Elfate companion started laughing again, while Brayden just sighed. I was sure the last 3 was left in the deck, Brayden muttered, leaning back with a stretch. Gamble big, lose big, Hamon said as the 2 kept laying out cards. It didn't take much longer, as it turned out. Brayden had been holding a pair of rogues. He'd clearly gone all in his conquest set, and hadn't bothered trying to set up with reserve cards to counter a conquest. Good game, Calvaro congratulated Hamon as he swept a pile of coins towards his corner of the table. Brayden stayed silent, choosing instead to take a long drink of his beer. I'll dedicate this one to Alexios, Hamon joked. Brayden almost choked on his beer, while Calvaro laughed along with Hamon. He hadn't had this much fun with a game of cards with them in a long while. So then, Brayden finally said, after managing to swallow his drink. Ready for another round? Sometimes you just need evening off to relax, playing a game of cards over drinks. And yes, I did come with actual rules for this card game. Think of it as a cross between Uno and Rummy. Interesting. You know, in terms of card games, like, I actually found out I really like playing Tycoon. You know, I played like a Tycoon-esque game with some friends recently. Recently being like nearly a month ago. Over a month ago. But I did pretty well, if I do say so myself. It's just fun, I don't know, it's like, through the luck of the draw, you could flip the entire game on its head. And then you could just like, no one's ever safe. We're all just like, competing against one another. Making it like, kind of just like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like there's RNG. It's very RNG based. There's not very much. There's some strategy to it. Like in terms of like how, when you throw your cards down and such. But it's like, it's a bit more about kind of also just being prepared to deal with like bad draws when they happen. Because you know, Tycoon, there's you have the rich and the poor, but the poor can have like the revolution and just like completely flip the order and potentially like work themselves up the ranks without having to deal with the drawbacks that come with being like lower in the totem pole. It's a fun game. It's a fun game. I do like the description of how they play the game. It feels very like real to people actually like gambling and shit at cards. And on that note, I think I'm spent. I wanted to read for a bit longer. I would have liked to cover like a bit more story stuff, but as soon as I sat down to stream today, I started feeling really sleepy. But I still really want to read with you guys because I love reading. I love doing the little chill, talking heavy streams because I love talking with people. But I think I'm eeped the hell out, and I need to take it easy for the rest of the night. Let me think. I think I want to try streaming Monday. Because that seems like looking at my mental schedule, that seems like a good time to do things. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but it will be something. Let's see, Monday is like the 28th. So, okay, 28th. Definitely, we're chilling. We're chilling on Monday. On a Halloween night, or the night before, I want to play a spooky game. But other than that, I have no plans. I'll figure that out as it comes. I'll make a schedule. I'll stick with the schedule. That's all I have to say. Now let's go find somebody to harass. I have a option here, but I'm gonna take a look and see if we can harass somebody that we haven't harassed yet. Remember that time you mentioned a Flash game website? I think I remember that. The Congregate, was it? That website? I think that was the one. Correct me if I'm incorrect. Let me see what other people are doing. Oh, this person. Oh, another one? Oh, you found it! Oh, you should link me to it so I could save the link. Before I die, those are my last words. Oh yeah, you could just drop the link there. And I could just, or you could just drop the name and I can, like, search it up. Either one. Either one is fine with me, personally. So, Furry Harlem. I see. Oh yeah, I see. Oh, this website's cute. Oh, there's a bunch of Flash games. Oh. Oh, it has Ruffle on it, so you keep playing them. Oh, that's cool. Thank you for linking this to me. I could check it out. I gotta poke around here. I love playing the Flash games. They all look really cute. I love just the look of the page on its own. It's just adorable. The little icons. Oh yeah, there we go. Flash game. That's very cool. Thank you for linking this to me. I must poke around on it. I need to see all the cute little Flash games. Another time though. I'm sleepy right now. But yeah, I think I found a target. I found a decent target to intrude upon. We're reading Sherlock Holmes books. Interesting. I love it when people read. That's why I'm here to read. Good night. I will see you on Monday for definitely a longer stream. Because my sleep schedule got so fucked up this week. I've gotten like 5 hours of sleep for like several days straight, and my brain has had enough. I'm gonna get sleep tonight, and I'll be so rested. I'll be so rested for Monday. Alright. Okay. See you in a couple days. Take care of yourselves. Get some water. Chill. Have a good time in my absence. I will save my energy. And also, I have something special for Monday too. I forgot I mentioned it earlier, but if you missed it, I have something special for Monday, and I'm very excited to share it. That's all. But yes, let's go. Goodbye. Ah.